The following is an interview with poet Megan Benninger, whose poetry appears in Into the Mirror, a literary collection. Please be aware that there are sensitive topics discussed in this interview, including pedophilia and spiritual abuse. The following poem was written by Megan Benninger, and I feel as if it is important for me to read it now because due to the topic, we didn't really have a chance to really dig into her poetry the way I wanted to. So I wanted to read this poem now as a way to kind of encapsulate what is going to be talked about in the video. Church is a thing with friendship. Church is the thing with friendship that stirs my heart to praise, the one who sets my soul afire with his mysterious ways. The friends who gather round my table speak of God with me, yet no more in a steepled house will these communions be. Those temples led by vicious wolves devoured my spirit, stole my trust, imperiled my children, covered up. Hold nothing now but my disgust. So at my table there I'll be, breaking bread, sipping wine, enjoying church with confidants, exalting the divine. Once again, you're here with Wild Ink Publishing, and we are here talking about the book Into the Mirror. I have been interviewing authors and poets that took part in this literary anthology. This literary anthology is basically one where we asked authors and poets to write about what was boring a hole through their heart, through their soul, through their mind, what they needed to get off their chest, and to do so creatively in poetry, short stories, memoirs, personal essays. And so I'm here today with Megan Benninger, who is going to talk about her poetry in Into the Mirror, and it's pretty heavy, really good, and she really does have a story to tell. But first, if you would please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you don't miss any of these author interviews. Thanks. Hi, Megan. Thank you.
Hi, thank you.
So
Thank you for putting this anthology together. It's just wonderful. I love it so much.
So, I mean, it all comes down to just all of the authors and poets really did dig deep into themselves for these. These are really deep pieces that I thank everybody. It's humbling because you all trusted me with all of this, with the things that are the most important in your lives. Thank you so much. So first of all, I actually already knew Megan before this because I taught her son English for 2 or 3 years, and that was a joy. He's incredibly creative and hilarious. So I'm excited to get the chance to work with you. Okay, so I'm going to ask, and I know this will probably take up the most amount of time.
Sure.
What led you to putting your poetry in the anthology? Can you talk about that?
Sure. Interestingly, I guess I never thought about publishing it. It kind of, when I wrote it, it was for me. And I did share it, on social media some, but it was really just from my heart, just what I was feeling in the moment. And what led to that was really a lifetime of spiritual abuse that I started uncovering. I knew I had been in a cult when I was in college, and for 2.5 years, and came out of that. And I knew that was bad, and I could see that. But what I didn't realize is abuse, spiritual abuse in particular, had been so normalized in my life that even coming out of that extreme cult, I just kept getting back into churches like that were very fundamentalist and controlling. And I just kept falling into the same traps over and over. And the last church I was in, the final experience I had, was in a Baptist church, Southern Baptist church. And it's a really long story, but my husband and I found out that one of our pastors of 12 years was actually a convicted child molester. Mm. And it wasn't something where everybody knew and, was forgiving, and he was open about it. This was hidden, and children were put in danger. The parents didn't know. There were a few people in leadership that knew and kept it quiet. And so you can actually read that story in USA Today. It's called The Tongue is a Fire. And it was a brutal experience. And Dom and I, my husband, we blew the whistle. We were the whistleblowers initially.
How did you find out?
It was actually, so really interesting story. I guess having had the spiritual trauma I had in the cult was beneficial, because while we were at that church, all of a sudden the head pastor left. So we knew something was weird. He said he felt called to another church, but that didn't quite make sense because it was his father's church before him. I mean, he loved this church with his whole heart, poured himself into it. And he just left with like no notice. Dom and I actually left because of my panic attacks, because I'm like, I just can't do this anymore. I can't be in this church.
Right.
Because my health, it's just, I can't lose my health. I mean, I would go home crying after church every day, and it would be till like Tuesday till I could get back on track. And that's not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So we left not even knowing what was going on. We just knew something was wrong.
I think this is important because I think so many people, they don't realize just the body connection to stressors, to these things, and your intuition. And when your intuition is screaming at you, it can come out in your health. Absolutely.
I think that's exactly what happened. We told the church we were taking a break.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were out for probably 2 months, not going anywhere for that time. And I was talking to my one friend, Nicole, who was still at the church and still didn't have a clue what was going on. And we were just talking. I was saying, have you guys figured it out yet? What's happening? Like, why is everything so weird? She's like, no. And I said, I just have this gut feeling, and I don't have any reason to believe this. I haven't seen anything, heard anything. And maybe it's the cult experience, but I just feel like there's sexual sin. I would use the word abuse now.
Yeah.
So she said, oh, well, did you know about Don Foos's conviction? And I said, conviction?
Right.
And I can say his name, by the way, because it is published in USA Today.
Okay.
And yeah, I said, no. She said, she got real quiet and she said, you need to do background checks. And I said, okay, we will. We ran the police background check, state of Pennsylvania, for all of our pastors. And she didn't tell me the details, obviously. She was too scared to tell me. But I did start Googling right away. First thing that came up was that he had lost his teaching license and that he was considered a danger to the children of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So just that, I was like, what? Why is he around my kids then?
You have to volunteer. There are volunteer background checks and things like that. Are pastors not also checked?
Because at the time, right before that, this all happened, was when the law changed. Sandusky happened, that right. Sandusky case, which made the Pennsylvania law for mandated reporters. Everyone has to get background checks in any kind of volunteer position near kids. I actually took that over for the church because the head pastor was having a hard time getting people to do this. And Dom and I volunteered and said, we'll stay after church, we'll bring our laptops, we'll get everybody, to go through the process. So we did. And they told me at that time, don't worry about the pastors. They're already covered and taken care of through the school. So I was led to believe that they had their background checks because of the school. Right. And they weren't working with the kids anyway, was what I was told. They're not in the children's church. Meanwhile, his office was 6 feet from the girls' bathroom. It was unbelievable, really unbelievable. So their plan was that he wasn't supposed to have any contact with the kids in the school. It's only pre-K through kindergarten.
Okay.
After we started making a stink, the head pastor who had left wrote a 5-page letter, which I have published online. If anyone wants to look for it, churchtrauma.org. I published all the documentation. that went with the story, with the USA Today story, so people can actually read the documentation. He wrote a 5-page letter to the board saying that, he didn't know that Don Foose had served jail time, but he knew he couldn't get his clearances, and he knew it had to do with child abuse. And he covered up tons and tons of allegations of kids over the year. But he was doing all these inappropriate things with kids, having them on his lap, pushing the girls on the swings by their butts, having little girls straddle his leg, just. And my kids, I have 5 children, 5 children. And he was their favorite pastor.
Right.
For 12 years, he baptized my oldest 2 kids, Aaron, who you had, and Anya, well, I shouldn't say their names, but Anya, they're in the article. I'll say their names. And it just broke their hearts. It destroyed their faith.
Yeah.
It's just hard to explain how deep this went for me.
Oh no. And that's the thing. You're part of the deconstruction movement now.
Yeah.
And that is evident in your poetry and Into the Mirror. How are you coping with that? Your whole worldview has gone, really, it's gone. Like how do you, how are you doing with it?
Well, in the beginning, I really did take everyone's words to heart of, don't let this ruin God for you. And I really tried really hard. And Dom and I did find another church for a while, but I had panic attacks then just right off. I couldn't even handle I still can't handle, I have nightmares about churches almost every night still. And I'm going to therapy, yes. And it's still there. And I can't go to a church. I can't read Bible verses like other, I can't just sit and read the Bible. Hearing a sermon can just make me sick.
Right.
It's hard to explain how traumatic it is, but but as time went on, I had a chronic illness. I got diagnosed with Lyme disease right about this time that, in the story. And my therapist said, you really need to stop going to church for a while if you can, because you're not going to get well if you don't stop putting your body under this trauma, this constant trauma for you, and so I agreed to take a break. And this is going to be controversial to say, I know it is, but after I really did take that break seriously, and I didn't listen to sermons online. I really took a break from religion to Christianity it was a good 6 months or more. And this is the part that I know it's hard to hear is for Christians, but it's true. I started basically deprogramming. I wasn't having constant input. I want to say indoctrination, because I truly believe the type of Christianity I was in, which very well may not be all Christianity, but I was in very fundamentalist evangelical churches, was indoctrination akin to brainwashing. And I also had trauma bonds, I found out, which is something that happens in abusive relationships.
Right.
And I basically had that with religion, with church. I didn't realize how unhealthy it was, and I couldn't as long as I was in it. And, my therapist certainly didn't mean for this to happen. And she's even actually upset that I've left Christianity. She says people in general do better when they have something greater to believe in. And I know the research shows that, but I have found more research that says that actually isn't the case in more fundamentalist churches, especially for women. So there is more detailed, research that shows otherwise. So all that to say, I'm starting over. None of it makes sense to me anymore. When I can see clearly, it's not constantly coming at me, and I'm able to just process, things stopped making sense. And yeah, it's a hard place to be.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
necessary for
And
me.
no, no, absolutely. And I've seen some of the comments that you've gotten on Facebook. A lot of people are behind you, but a lot of people are really cruel to you. And when you're trying to heal, it just kind of, I can feel it in your responses. You're very strong. You're very, very strong in your responses. But I can feel kind of like, it feels like to me as if your wounds are being ripped right open again
Yeah.
when people start saying,
You're just following men. Just
yeah,
read a different version of the Bible and pray more. And I'm like,
you don't understand how, yeah,
not this.
yeah,
I know. And
yeah,
I do understand them because I used to be them.
yeah,
And I do try to have compassion, even though I get frustrated. Like, I try not to be rude.
yeah,
I try so hard, and I'm not always successful, because that trauma is there, and it comes
yeah,
out.
yeah,
Yep.
absolutely, absolutely. And so you've done, I mean, you haven't just gone through this. This spurred you on to create something that is actually helpful for people. Do you want to talk about your website?
Yeah, yeah. So my husband and I actually then started a website called baptistaccountability.org, and it's actually a database
Mhm.
of predators, of abusers in Baptist um, denominational churches and schools, anything Baptist related.
Mhm.
We're trying to be as broad as possible with it. We'd love to just say all religions, but it's just the two of us right now. Until it grows, we can't do
Right.
more than that. Just, I mean, it's hard for just the two of us to keep up. There are so many.
I mean,
Baptist is really bad.
it's important, especially since like churches like this, some of them cover it up. So it's important for,
And what really spurred this was what happened after
okay.
the whistleblowing. He retired,
Mhm.
but guess what? 6 months later, he was at a church 20 minutes down the road preaching with kids. And so we had a whole big confrontation with that church that was
Okay.
horribly messy again. They wished they didn't even want to know. I mean, well, the pastor didn't. And we didn't just email the pastor, we emailed the whole leadership, because we found out that if you email one person, it can get buried. We mailed them all, so it was like a big, everybody knew.
Yeah.
And they did not want to tell the church. We went to the state Baptist Association. They said, well, we don't, in Baptist churches, they're autonomous. Each church is its own governed body. There's no real hierarchy outside of that. So all they said was, all we can do is encourage them. We can't force them to do anything. I'm like, you could tell the congregation though, right? Couldn't you just tell them? Like, okay. Oh, and we kind of got off that topic there. I wanted to get into that. This was all legal, technically. I don't know. I asked the police investigator like 4 times to go through this with me. I do not understand how this is legal. I didn't like his answers. I don't, but from what I hear, Jimmy Hinton is a friend of mine who does this work too, and he's in Pennsylvania, and he works for an organization called Grace, which is Godly Response to Abuse in Christian Environments. Anyway, he works in the Pennsylvania end of things, and he said that, yeah, even the police don't really know the laws, and the laws are so vague and they're not enforced because they don't have the manpower to make this happen.
I know we're supposed to be talking about the poetry,
I
but
know, sorry.
no, this is really, really important. What advice would you have for someone who is suspecting this sort of thing? Like, what steps? Who do they contact? Can they contact you? Can they?
Oh, people are welcome to contact me anytime. Probably the best bet is through the baptistaccountability.org database. There, we have a contact form on there. Grace, that I mentioned earlier, Godly Response to Abuse in Christian Environments, that was founded by Billy Graham's grandson, Boz Chividian.
Okay.
So he's pretty well known, and it is a wonderful organization. I highly recommend reaching out to them. But first and foremost, report it to the police. Don't ever go to your pastor first. That's what we learned through all this, that the law really says if you suspect child abuse, you are to report it to the police. You are not to go to your boss or your coworker or anyone, you are to report it straight to Childline or the police station on your own. And you do not get held liable if you're wrong. It's totally safe. And I've actually since then done it many times because of working with the database and people reporting to me. I've had to call and report on their behalf. So if I'm wrong, if you're wrong, it's all good faith. They want you to report so they can investigate and see if something's going on. It's worth it because it could save a child or more. And they never have just one victim. I read a book, the main expert on this right now is Anna Salter, and she wrote a book called Predators. There's a big long subtitle, but she said in there that until when a predator gets caught, a child predator, they have offended an average of 150 times already before getting caught. And it's never just once. And that usually after they get caught, even if they get imprisoned, they just get smarter about not getting caught. So they keep going on if they're not in prison. The research shows that no one has ever recovered from pedophilia or child molestation type urges. It's pretty complicated. There are different levels and things, but overall, it's not something that can be rehabilitated right now. My greatest hope is that will change. Like, we didn't know about trauma before, now we do. Maybe there will be some therapy in the future, but right now there's not. They have to be kept away from children. Get a job somewhere else.
Predators generally work in fields with children because they go and they try and groom
their
them.
goal.
The whole point, like, but my child loves him. Yeah, that's
the point.
That's what
they do.
Yeah, and so it's
they
really
groom. They make you fall in love with them. They make you, everyone around that. They groom whole communities. They don't just groom the child. They groom everyone to think they are the best, most wonderful person, so that nobody will believe it when the child comes forward. They're just a child. They're making it up. And also, Anna Salter said in her book, 93% of child predators identify themselves as highly religious. So and Jimmy Hinton said that his father, he keeps in touch with his own father's in prison for life for molesting like 90 some kids, I think. It's horrendous. And he was a pastor. His dad was a pastor. So he tries to like uncover the thinking of his dad and, things like that. And his dad said that in prison, they actually learn from other predators how to get better at it. And their main thing they tell each other is, you have to, while you're in prison, find God. Because then, and you have to convince everyone in the prison, all of the prison guards and everything, that you are reformed and you have found God. And then when you get out, you will be welcomed right into the Christian community, because they're so loving and gracious and give you a second chance. So they're preying on Christians' grace and forgiveness. It seems like the more fundamentalist, the more black and white, the Bible is inerrant, this is how we live, we have rules, we have, the more closed it is, like that, controlled, the worse the abuse is. Because they can get away with it, and because they believe in hierarchy more. They believe that the pastor has authority over them. And so what he says goes. And so if the pastor or the youth pastor abuses someone, they're next to God. It's very like the Catholic. That's what we have in similar with the Catholic, because Catholic has a good hierarchy and should be more accountable, but they're still not. And what really the common thread is this hierarchical view of humanity of, this person's closer to God, I have to listen to them. And if they say I shouldn't wear pants, it's not in the Bible, but they know better, and things like that. And so there's that level of control. A lot of people are leaving these spaces and are seeing it. It's a really different way of thinking about the world. And
it is.
I used to believe it all the way. Believe me, I believed it. I fought it all. And
Your section starts on page 25, but they're so good. They're so okay. So did you use the writing of the poetry as a way, like I know people use poetry as a form of therapy for themselves. Is that what this was?
Yeah, it was like, it just poured out of me. It was like what my pain needed to just get out.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think, and there's other people in here who are deconstructing and who are deconstructing from
yes, I saw.
major trauma, major trauma. And I mean, it's heartbreaking and it's real and it's raw. And I do think that reading this sort of thing for someone who is going through something similar, it can help them to feel less alone, can be a bit cathartic to know that, okay, I am not the only person thinking this. I am
Thank you. And that is why I decided to go public with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, because if everybody's just so hush hush, we don't talk about that, no one has a chance to heal, and these people can continue to do what they do. Exactly. And so you have to get it out there. And how your daughter is at a Christian college right now.
Yes.
How is she dealing with being there while the family is deconstructing, trying to find their place again, trying to find their place within the whole ethos? Yeah. How is she doing at the Christian University?
She's doing really well right now. I mean, she had a good group of friends that were from the beginning, thankfully. Well, some of them were fundamentalists. A lot of her friends are deconstructing. I mean, it is quite a movement right now. It seems to be happening for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. She is doing some really amazing artwork to process through her pain. And being a Christian university, some of it, I'm not sure how they always feel about it.
For those that don't know, what is the deconstruction movement?
Yeah, it's basically all of a sudden your faith just doesn't make sense to you. Logical sense. Yeah. It's not something you go searching for. No, nobody I know has said, I think I want to just leave my faith. Yeah. It happens to you. Like, you just all of a sudden nothing makes sense anymore. And there's usually something that spurs it. Right. Like it's something traumatic. Right. But I think that COVID was that thing for a lot of people. That separated them from the physical church, and you're not feeling that control of, right. Even if you're doing it online, you're not feeling that same level of this person having authority in your life, right, this pastor or whatever. And a lot of people have really changed their minds. It's changing your mind about religion and starting over and trying to, some people just become atheists and say heck with it all. Right. Some people end up coming back.
I'm sure. And I think that taking on creativity, especially when trying to find where you belong, because that's a painful process. You were raised in this. This has been all you've known.
Earth. And right. It just, to me, how is the church of all places, right, I've discovered now, is the worst place for abuse. It is, and survivors will tell you that. Like, it's, from a lot of survivors, that is the absolute worst place to go to get support. I just need to say this: huge amount of pastors who are even convicted child molesters. Convicted. And it's like unknown to their congregation, and some it's even known to the congregation, and they allow it, and they just think that's a good second chance. And it is destroying so many children's lives. I want more for Christianity. I do. Like, even if I never go back, I don't want the church to be this place.
Right. So I wanted to talk to you about your plans for the future. I know that you wrote the poems in Into the Mirror out of a situation and as a way to cope. However, do you have plans in the future for future publishing or writing?
I actually do. And it's just so funny to me, because just months ago, none of this ever occurred to me. And I'm loving it. And I wrote another poem that a few people encouraged me to turn into a children's book. And so it's actually very coming out of the fundamentalist frame of mind. It's a definite turn for me, but it's a very pro LGBTQ plus book, and it's for kids who are coming out, younger children who might be coming out in families that are Christian,
Okay.
whether they be fundamentalist or not.
Mhm.
But kind of ways to think about that with God,
Mhm.
in a very non-condemning way that
Okay.
is prevalent in many churches,
Mhm.
and how to think about it. And yeah, it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
It was one of those things that just came out, and yeah, I felt it in my heart.
God is love, and so
Yes.
he loves all of his children. And yeah,
This is
yeah.
it's another passion of mine now. So
I love it. This is wonderful. And I know that you have been posting some more of your deconstruction poetry on Facebook lately. And so
oh yes.
you're considering compiling those into your own personal book of poetry.
It's
So
so
yeah.
funny because it's just none of this would have happened without you. Thank you, Abby, because um yeah, just knowing you and knowing this project has been wonderful. And it's something, had you not had this happen, I would never have considered. It's just amazing. It was just
Oh,
like, what's the word? Serendipitous.
oh, yeah. Well, thank you for
Synchronicity.
saying that. But I thank you so much for putting your poetry in it and submitting it. I was definitely excited to get your work, definitely. And I think that a lot of it is just so important for people to realize and to raise awareness of what is going on. And I think
Oh,
that
thank you.
a lot of people don't understand the deconstruction movement. And I think that you put it in a way that, and
I
I
want
think,
people to understand it,
yeah,
because it's, like I said, it's not something we set out to do and we're
of
trying to go
course,
against the church.
of
It
course.
just kind of happens to you.
Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. So thank you very, very much. Everybody who watched this far, please do hit subscribe to hear more of our author videos. Thank you for coming by.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.